reading EVERNIGHT by Ross Mackenzie, the last chapter before half term, chapter 25. It is called The First Rescue. Old Hans poured another fire whiskey. Was it the fourth or the fifth? Oh, what did it matter? And tipped it down his neck. He was beginning to feel a little more relaxed about the whole situation. Soon Shadow Jack would come and clean it all up, and then, when he was gone again, old Hans's pockets would be full of coins. The clockwork bird was lying on his desk, and he picked it up and stroked the cold, shining gold of its wing feathers. It really was a shame that he couldn't keep it for himself, such a rare and wondrous object. When the bird's sapphire eyes began to glow, old Hans thought at first it was the whiskey playing tricks on his mind. But he squinted at it and adjusted his specs, and still the eyes glowed. The bird moved. It jerked its wings awkwardly. Old Hans let out a squeak of delight. He jumped in his chair, the legs screeching on the floor. The clockwork bird stood up. It shook itself down. It snapped its head around to face him, and it seemed to look him up and down. When it launched itself at old Hans, he let out half a scream and pushed backwards, crashing his chair to the floor. The bird was all over him, pecking at his face, his eyes scratching with sharp feet. Old Hans tried to hide beneath one arm, swatting at the bird with the other, but it was unstoppable. "Get off! Get off me!" He stumbled to his feet, barging blindly around the room, knocking over lamps and ornaments, finding the door at last. Away to the landing he fled, feeling for the banister, the bird still pecking at him. His foot missed the first step and he fell, feet and arms and legs tangled, banging and bouncing until he came to rest at the foot of the stairs. He was aware that the bird had landed on his face, and it gave him one last peck on the forehead for good measure. Then old Hans passed out. Down in the storeroom, Lara's fingers traced the place in the wall where the mortar between the bricks had been removed. She dug her fingers into the gap, the way she might do in the sewers when she found a plum-toshing spot, removed the loose bricks, and stepped back, peering into the space in the wall and hoping desperately for a way out. There was a safe nestling in the gap. "What you got in there, you old rat?" She fiddled with the dial, clicking it this way and that, but the combination could have been anything, and the safe stayed locked. Lara went back to the door. "I found your safe!" she yelled. "I got it open! I filled my pockets with your stuff. You better come here and stop me!" But when he did not reply, she got angry again and banged on the door. "Let me out! Let me—" A series of sounds echoed through from the rooms above. First a yell, then a bang, then some awkward scrapes and shuffling footsteps. Lara leaned close to the door, listening. It sounded like some sort of struggle. The racket ended with a cacophony of tumbling bangs. Breathless, she stayed silent. There were no more sounds, no trace of footsteps or creaking boards. Had the strangler somehow found out about the bird? Had he come for it? Old Hans? The words had barely escaped her mouth when that familiar, delicate sound began to spill from her locket. She pulled it free, held it up, and watched in dumbfounded amazement as the etchings of the bird glowed dazzlingly bright. The sound of rattling in the lock made her jump. She reached for the nearest object, a candlestick, and raised it above her head as the door unlocked and creaked slowly open. The doorway was empty. The hallway was in darkness, the glow from Lara's locket casting a spooky light on the walls. She edged out of the storeroom, keeping the candlestick above her head, ready to strike. But as she moved into the hall, all was quiet and eerily still. Old Hans's crumpled body lay at the foot of the stairs. She dashed to his side, crouched down, put her ear to his cheek, and found a heartbeat. The old fart was still breathing, And Lara was relieved about that, not least because she had no desire to be wanted by the coppers in connection with a dead body. Tap, clack, rattle, rattle. The sound startled Lara, and she spun around and followed her ears, creeping to the open door of the storeroom, peering around the edge to the other side. What she saw there made her stop, blink, and look again. The clockwork bird was moving around as if it were alive. Not only that, but it seemed to have managed to get its beak jammed in the keyhole, and it was flapping its wings and shaking its head madly, trying to break free. Lara reached out a trembling hand. Easy! Hush now! Her fingers closed around the cool metal of the bird's wings, and she took its head gently between her thumb and forefinger and managed to manoeuvre it free. She opened her hand. The bird sat in her palm, staring up at her, its head twitching this way and that. The soft whispering came from her locket again. She felt a ripple pass through her entire body. The locket erupted with light, filling the whole shop. Hell's teeth! She staggered back, covering her eyes, and then the light died away, and her vision took a few moments to adjust to the dim hallway again. The bird was standing by her feet, looking up at her. It gave one of her shoes a peck, then leapt gracefully into the air and landed on her shoulder. It seemed quite at home there. Slowly, very slowly, Lara raised her hand to stroke the golden feathers of its wings. "What are you, Mr. Bird?" There was a groan from the floor. Old Hans's voice said, "Hag!" His eyes were wide open, his face a twisted mask of fear and disgust. "Hag!" he repeated, the strength coming back to his tongue. He pointed a shaking finger at Lara and at the locket around her neck. "Hag magic!" "Now, Old Hans, this is not what it looks like." Lara knew exactly what this looked like. There was an enchanted clockwork bird on her shoulder and a magic locket around her neck. It couldn't have been any more obvious if someone had written "Hag" across her forehead. "Hag! Murderer! You tried to finish me off." "I never did." He was on his knees now, and Lara tried to help him up, but he swatted her away. "Get off! Someone call the coppers! Help!" Lara knew there was no reasoning with him. Thick, choking panic clogged her throat. Everyone was going to think she was a hag. They'd hunt her, try her, hang her. She reached down and took the keys from Old Hans's pocket and ran through the shop to the door, trying the different keys in the locks until, click, they began to open. "Lara!" Old Hans was at his counter now. Click. "Give me the bird and I won't tell anyone your secret." Click. "Lara! Lara Bell Fox!" Click. The door opened. Lara dropped the keys and grabbed the clockwork bird and stuffed it in her pocket. Then she ran out into Bone Alley, Old Hans shouting after her. "Help! Thief!" The yell brought a murmur from the crowds, but this was Kingshaven and thieves were as numerous as raindrops. "Hag!" That word, spoken in the open, was as powerful as a pistol shot. It stopped Lara in her tracks, and the murmurs all around her turned to gasps and shrieks. She looked back at Old Hans, and for a moment she thought he looked sorry, and that he'd decided to let her go. But his face hardened, and he pointed at her. "Hag! Hag there! She tried to kill me!" Others in the street had stopped now too, and they were gawking at her, pointing, whispering. "Keep back!" yelled someone. "Somebody get the coppers!" "She's only a girl. I say we take care of her ourselves." "Yeah, hag children aren't so dangerous, I heard." Lara turned on the spot, her heart frozen, her body shivering. There were people all around her now, closing in. She'd have done something by now if she could. Here, there'll be a reward if we catch her. Is it less if she's dead? Everything seemed to slow down. Lara looked at their faces. These were normal people, mothers and fathers with children and families, but it was as if they had been possessed by a devil. They were hissing and spitting and jeering, and their eyes were full of malice and bloodlust. Some were almost close enough to touch her now. Stay back! There were hands on her shoulders, her arms. She struggled free, but more hands grabbed at her hair and face, and she smelled the stink of sweat and alcohol, and her eyes blurred with tears, the street a spinning tangle of fear. A hand clamped over her face, and another reached into her coat, fumbling around. Lara realised it was old Hans trying to get the bird. She bit down hard on his finger, heard a scream, and the hand let go. She bit me! Get her! Look, coppers! Oi, boys, do your job, won't you? Get this hag off our streets!